We're renovating your childhood room for the baby," my sister Emma announced, standing in my doorway with paint samples fanned out like playing cards. I stared at her 7-month pregnant belly, then at the soft yellow and mint green swatches in her hand. I was 26 years old, still living at home, paying $1,900 monthly in rent to my parents. Where am I supposed to sleep? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Dad appeared behind Emma, shrugged his shoulders with casual indifference. "Figure it out, Rosemary. Family expands." The words hit me like ice water. I sat on my childhood bed, surrounded by the lavender walls I'd painted during high school, staring at my sister as she continued flipping through paint samples as if my entire world hadn't just been turned upside down. The audacity of the moment was breathtaking. Here I was, a grown woman paying nearly $2,000 every month to live in what I thought was a mutually beneficial arrangement, and they were casually evicting me for nursery space. "When exactly were you planning to tell me about this?" I managed to ask, my hands trembling slightly as I gestured around the room that had been my sanctuary for over a decade. Emma shifted uncomfortably, her hand resting on her belly. "We thought you'd understand. I mean, you're not married, you don't have kids. This baby needs a proper nursery, and this room has the best natural light." The casual dismissal of my life, my needs, my contributions to this household felt like a physical blow. I had been faithfully paying rent for the past 2 years, helping with utilities, buying groceries, and maintaining the house like any responsible tenant would. The money I paid each month was supposed to be helping me save for my own place while contributing fairly to the household expenses. "And where exactly do you expect me to live while you transform my room into a nursery?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Dad reappeared in the doorway, his expression impatient. "There's the basement, or you could sleep in the living room temporarily. We'll figure something out." The basement. They wanted me, a 26-year-old marketing professional, to live in our damp, unfinished basement so my pregnant sister could have the best room in the house. The suggestion was so absurd, so completely tone-deaf, that I almost laughed. Instead, I stood up and began pulling clothes from my closet. "I'll figure something out, all right." "What are you doing?" Emma asked, finally showing some concern as I started stuffing clothes into garbage bags. Exactly what Dad suggested, figuring it out. Within 3 hours, I had packed everything I owned into my Honda Civic and called my best friend, Ashley. She lived in a 1-bedroom apartment across town, but she didn't hesitate when I explained the situation. "Come over right now," she said. "We'll make it work." As I loaded the last bag into my car, Mom finally emerged from wherever she'd been hiding during this family discussion. "Rosemary, don't be dramatic. We can work this out reasonably." "Reasonably?" I turned to face her, my exhaustion and hurt finally boiling over. "You want to talk about reasonable? Let's talk about the fact that I've paid you $38,000 in rent over the past 2 years. Let's talk about how I've contributed to groceries, utilities, and house maintenance. Let's talk about how reasonable it is to give me 0 notice before kicking me out of my room." Mom's face flushed. "We're not kicking you out. We're just repurposing the space temporarily." "For how long? Until the baby graduates from high school?" I didn't wait for an answer. I got in my car and drove away from the house I'd called home for 26 years, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Ashley greeted me at her apartment with wine and tissues, letting me cry on her couch while she made up a bed on her living room floor. The next morning, I was awakened by Ashley's phone ringing. She answered with a groggy voice, then suddenly sat up straight. "Rosemary," she whispered, covering the phone, "there's a contractor at your parents' house asking about payment for some renovation work." I grabbed the phone from her hand. The man on the other end introduced himself as Jake Morrison from Morrison Construction. He sounded confused and slightly irritated. "I'm here to start the nursery renovation at the Henderson residence," he said. "But there seems to be some confusion about payment. The invoice is $28,000, and your father is telling me to contact you about the check." $28,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. I had paid them nearly $40,000 in rent, and now they expected me to fund an elaborate nursery renovation on top of it. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," I said carefully. "I'm not responsible for that payment." "Well, someone needs to be," Jake replied. "I've got a crew here and materials on order. This is a significant project." I hung up and immediately called my parents' house. Dad answered on the first ring as if he'd been waiting for my call. "Rosemary, we need to talk about the renovation cost," he said without preamble. "We certainly do." I drove back to the family house within an hour, my mind racing with questions and a growing sense of dread. When I walked into the kitchen, I found my parents and Emma sitting around the table like some sort of tribunal. The contractor, Jake, stood awkwardly by the back door, clearly wanting to escape the family drama he'd stumbled into. "Sit down, honey," Mom said, gesturing to the empty chair. "We need to discuss the financial arrangements." I remained standing, crossing my arms. What financial arrangements? I was never consulted about any renovation, let alone asked to pay for one. Dad pulled out a folder filled with papers. "The thing is, Rosemary, we've been using your rent money for various family expenses over the past year. We assumed you'd want to continue supporting the family, especially with the baby coming." The words hit me like a sledgehammer. "What do you mean, family expenses?" Emma shifted uncomfortably in her chair, avoiding eye contact. Mom cleared her throat and began pulling receipts from the folder. "Well, there was Emma's wedding dress, which cost $4,000. Then the honeymoon deposit, another $6,000. We've been helping with their groceries and car payments since Emma stopped working full-time because of morning sickness." I stared at the receipts being laid out in front of me like evidence in a court case. My rent money, the money I thought was contributing to household expenses and helping me save for my own place, had been funding my sister's life choices. "Let me get this straight," I said slowly. "You've been taking my $1,900 every month and spending it on Emma's wedding and living expenses, and now you want me to pay $28,000 for a nursery renovation in the room you're kicking me out of." "We're not kicking you out," Dad protested. "We're expanding the family space by taking my room and my money." Emma finally spoke up, her voice small. "I thought Mom and Dad were paying for the renovation. I had no idea they expected you to cover it." This was the first crack in the unified front, and I seized on it. "So you knew nothing about where the money for your wedding came from? Nothing about who was subsidizing your life for the past year?" Emma's silence was answer enough. Jake, the contractor, cleared his throat awkwardly. "Look, folks, I don't want to get in the middle of family business, but I need to know who's responsible for this invoice. I've got permits, pulled materials ordered, and a crew scheduled. If payment isn't arranged in the next 48 hours, there will be cancellation fees and legal complications." Dad leaned forward. "Rosemary has been contributing to the household, and we assumed she'd want to continue supporting her sister during this important time." The manipulation was so blatant, so perfectly orchestrated, that I felt a strange calm settle over me. This wasn't a misunderstanding or poor communication. This was a deliberate financial trap designed to extract money from me while making me feel guilty for not wanting to pay. "I need to see every receipt, every bank statement, every record of where my rent money has gone for the past 2 years, I said. Mom's face went pale. "That's not necessary, dear. We can work this out between us." "Oh, it's absolutely necessary because what you're describing sounds like fraud." The word hung in the air like smoke. Emma gasped. Dad's face turned red, and even Jake looked uncomfortable. "That's a very serious accusation," Dad said, his voice tight. "And taking someone's money under false pretenses is a very serious crime," I replied. I pulled out my phone and started dialing. "Jake, I'm going to need you to hold off on any work until we resolve this. I'm calling my lawyer." "Your lawyer?" Mom stood up quickly. "Rosemary, there's no need for lawyers. We're family." "Family doesn't steal from each other, Mom." The truth was, I didn't have a lawyer, but I knew someone who did. Ashley worked at a legal aid clinic and she'd given me the contact information for a tenant rights attorney the night before. As I dialed the number, I watched my family's expressions change from confident manipulation to genuine panic. While I waited for the lawyer to answer, Jake approached me quietly. "Miss Henderson." He said, "I don't know what's going on here, but I run an honest business. If there's any question about payment or authorization for this work, I need to know now." "There's definitely a question," I said. "In fact, I'm pretty sure this entire contract was signed without the authorization of the person they expect to pay for it." When the attorney answered, I explained the situation quickly. He agreed to see me that afternoon and advised me to document everything, including taking photos of any work that had already begun on the room. As I hung up, Emma burst into tears. "I'm so sorry, Rosemary," she sobbed. "I never wanted this to happen. I just needed help, and Mom and Dad said you were happy to contribute." For the first time in this entire ordeal, I felt a flicker of sympathy for my sister. She was pregnant scared and clearly caught between her own desperation and our parents' manipulation. But sympathy wouldn't pay the $28,000 invoice or give me back the money I'd lost over the past 2 years. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, addressing the room. "I'm going to meet with an attorney this afternoon to understand my rights as a tenant and as someone whose money has been misappropriated. Jake, I recommend you don't start any work until this is resolved legally. And Mom and Dad, I suggest you start gathering those financial records I asked for, because we're going to need a complete accounting of where every penny of my rent money has gone." I turned to leave, then stopped at the kitchen door. "Oh, and just so we're clear, I'm not paying for the renovation. I'm not paying cancellation fees. I'm not paying for anything else until I understand exactly how much money you've taken from me and what my legal options are." The drive to Ashley's apartment gave me time to process what had just happened. My parents hadn't just taken my room, they'd been systematically draining my finances while making me believe I was contributing to a fair arrangement. The rent money I thought was helping me build toward independence had been funding someone else's life while leaving me trapped and dependent. But as I pulled into Ashley's parking lot, I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. For the first time in 2 years, I could see the situation clearly. The manipulation, the guilt trips, the family loyalty arguments were all just smokescreens for financial exploitation. And now that I could see it, I could fight it. The attorney's office was a small, cluttered space above a coffee shop downtown. Margaret Walsh specialized in tenant rights and family financial disputes, according to her website. When I explained my situation, she leaned back in her chair and shook her head. "This is more common than you'd think," she said. "Adult children paying rent to parents often find themselves in legal gray areas, especially when the family starts treating them as both tenants and financial resources." She pulled out a legal pad and started taking notes as I detailed the past 2 years of payments, the sudden eviction notice, and the expected renovation costs. "The good news is that you've been paying rent regularly, which establishes you as a tenant with certain rights. The bad news is that family financial arrangements can be complicated to unravel legally." "What are my options?" Margaret flipped through her notes. "Well, first we need to establish whether this renovation was contracted with your knowledge or consent. If your parents signed a contract expecting you to pay without your authorization, that's problematic for them. Second, we need to determine if your rental arrangement included any written agreements about how your money would be used." I realized with sinking clarity that everything had been verbal. No lease. No written agreement about what my rent covered, no documentation of what I was entitled to as a paying tenant. "Nothing was written down," I admitted. "That actually works in your favor," Margaret said. "Without a written lease specifying otherwise, you have standard tenant protections. They can't just kick you out without proper notice, even for renovations." She handed me a business card. "I'm going to draft a cease and desist letter to send to your parents today. It will demand they stop any renovation work on your room without proper notice and legal process. I'm also going to request a full accounting of how your rent money has been used." "How much will this cost?" For a case like this, I usually work on contingency. If we recover money that was improperly taken from you, I take a percentage. If not, you only pay for the initial consultation and documents. I left the attorney's office feeling like I finally had someone on my side. The cease and desist letter would be delivered the next morning, and Margaret had advised me to start documenting everything, saving text messages, keeping receipts, and writing down every conversation about the situation. When I got back to Ashley's apartment, she was waiting with Chinese takeout and a bottle of wine. "How did it go?" she asked. I explained the meeting while we ate. Ashley listened intently, occasionally shaking her head in disbelief. "I can't believe they thought they could just steamroll you like that," she said. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Can we talk privately without Mom and Dad?" I showed the message to Ashley, who raised an eyebrow. Could be a trap. Or she might actually want to tell me the truth. I texted back that I'd meet Emma at a coffee shop near her apartment the next morning. Whatever she had to say, I wanted it to be away from our parents' influence. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the money, the manipulation, and the casual way my family had discarded my needs for Emma's wants. But I also thought about Margaret's confidence that I had legal options. For the first time in days, I felt like I might be able to fight back effectively. The next morning, Emma was already waiting at the coffee shop when I arrived. She looked exhausted with dark circles under her eyes and her usually perfect hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. "Thank you for meeting me," she said as I sat down across from her. "What did you want to talk about?" Emma stared into her coffee cup. "I need to tell you the truth about everything, about the money, the renovation, all of it." I waited, not trusting myself to speak without anger creeping into my voice. "Mom and Dad have been struggling financially for the past year," Emma began. "Dad's consulting business has been slow, and they've been using credit cards to cover the mortgage. When you started paying rent, it helped, but then you needed a wedding. Then I got pregnant and David lost his job." Emma looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "He got laid off from the accounting firm 2 months ago, right after we found out about the baby. We've been living on unemployment and whatever I make from freelance graphic design work." This was the first I'd heard about my brother-in-law's job loss. Why didn't anyone tell me? Because Mom and Dad said you'd feel obligated to help and they didn't want you to worry. Emma laughed bitterly. "They said it was better to just use your rent money to help us through the rough patch." The picture was becoming clearer, and it was even worse than I'd thought. Not only had my parents been misappropriating my money, but they'd been doing it to cover their own financial problems while helping Emma and David avoid the consequences of their situation. So the renovation was Dad's idea. He said it would kill 2 birds with 1 stone, get you to move out so we could move back in and save on our apartment rent and create a project expensive enough that you'd have to keep contributing money to the household. I felt physically sick. "You're telling me this was all a setup?" I think Dad saw it as a solution to everyone's problems. You'd get motivated to find your own place. We'd get help with living expenses and a free place to stay, and Mom and Dad would have steady income from your rent, plus whatever you contributed to the renovation. Except I'm the only one sacrificing anything in this arrangement. Emma nodded miserably. "I realized that yesterday when you walked out. I've been so focused on my own problems that I didn't think about what this was costing you." My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Jake Morrison, the contractor. I received a legal notice this morning about stopping work on your parents' house. Can we talk?" I showed Emma the message. Her face went pale. "You got a lawyer?" "I got a lawyer." "Rosemary, please, can't we work this out without involving lawyers? Mom and Dad are panicking about legal fees." They should have thought about that before they decided to commit fraud. Emma flinched at the word. It wasn't fraud. It was poor communication and bad decisions. Taking someone's money under false pretenses is fraud, Emma. Contracting work and expecting someone else to pay without their knowledge is fraud. Making me believe my rent was going toward household expenses when it was actually funding your life is fraud. I stood up to leave. "I'm sorry you and David are struggling. I'm sorry you're pregnant and scared. But I'm not responsible for fixing your problems by sacrificing my financial stability and future." "What happens now?" Emma asked quietly. Now you figure out how to handle your own situation without using me as a personal ATM. I called Jake Morrison from the parking lot. He suggested meeting at the job site so I could see exactly what work had been proposed and what had already been started. When I arrived at my parents' house, I found him measuring the windows in my former bedroom. "Miss Henderson," he said, "I have to say this is the strangest situation I've encountered in 20 years of construction work." "How so?" "Well, your parents signed a contract for extensive renovation work, including custom built-in closets, new flooring crown, molding, a complete bathroom renovation, and high-end fixtures. This isn't just painting a nursery, it's a luxury suite renovation." I looked around my childhood room, which had already been stripped of furniture and had holes in the walls where electrical work had begun. $28,000 worth. Actually, the total contract is $32,000. 28 was just the initial payment due. $32,000. My parents had planned to extract $32,000 from me to renovate a room they were kicking me out of, creating a luxury nursery for my sister's baby while I was supposed to live in the basement. "Mr. Morrison," I said, "I think you need to know that I never authorized this work, never agreed to pay for it, and never even knew it was being planned until after the contracts were signed." Jake set down his measuring tape. "Are you telling me your parents committed to a $32,000 renovation and just assumed you'd pay for it?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you." He whistled low. "Miss Henderson, I don't know what kind of family dynamics are at play here, but from a business perspective, I need someone to take legal responsibility for this contract. If your parents can't pay and you're not authorized to pay, I'm looking at a significant loss. What would happen if the contract was canceled? At this point, with permits pulled and work started, cancellation fees would be about $8,000, plus I'd have to bill for materials already ordered and work completed." I thought about Emma's tears, my parents' panic, and the legal advice Margaret had given me. Then I thought about $38,000 in rent payments that had funded other people's choices while leaving me trapped and financially dependent. "Mr. Morrison," I said, "what if I told you I might have a different proposition for you?" Jake Morrison looked intrigued as I explained my situation more thoroughly. I told him about the unauthorized use of my rent money, the lack of consultation about the renovation, and the expectation that I'd pay for work I'd never approved. "That's definitely a legal mess," he said. "But what kind of proposition are you thinking about?" "I work in marketing. I've noticed your truck doesn't have any company branding, and you don't seem to have much of an online presence. What if we worked out a deal where I help you expand your business in exchange for resolving this contract situation?" Jake raised an eyebrow. "You mean like a barter arrangement?" "Something like that. I'd need to know more about your business goals, but I've helped several small contractors in the past with websites, online marketing, and customer acquisition strategies." Before Jake could respond, we heard a car door slam outside. Through the bedroom window, I saw my parents hurrying up the front walk, both looking frantic. "I think we're about to have company," I said. Mom and Dad burst into the room moments later, both talking at once. "Rosemary, we got the most ridiculous letter from some lawyer," Mom began. "This is getting completely out of hand," Dad added. "We're family. We don't need lawyers involved in family decisions." "Actually," I said calmly, "we do need lawyers when family members commit fraud." "It's not fraud," Dad protested. "It's a misunderstanding about financial responsibilities." Jake cleared his throat. "Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, I'm going to need this payment situation resolved today. I've got a crew scheduled and materials on order. Either someone takes responsibility for this contract, or we're looking at cancellation fees and potential legal action." Mom's face went white. "Legal action." "Ma'am, this is a $32,000 contract. I can't just absorb that kind of loss because of family disagreements." $32,000. Mom turned to Dad. "You told me it was 28. "The 28 was the initial payment," Dad said defensively. "There are additional costs for completion." I watched this exchange with growing amazement. Not only had my parents planned to extract money from me for unauthorized work, but they hadn't even told each other the real cost of the project. "This is exactly why I called a lawyer," I said. because clearly no one in this family has been honest about anything. My phone buzzed with a call from Margaret Walsh. I excused myself to the hallway to answer. Rosemary. I've reviewed the contractor information you gave me, and I have some concerns, she said. If work has already begun on this project, your parents may have committed you to a binding contract without your consent. This could be considered fraudulent contracting. What does that mean for me? It means you might have grounds for a lawsuit not just against your parents, but potentially against the contractor if he proceeded with work without verifying payment authorization. I glanced back at the bedroom where Jake was trying to mediate between my increasingly panicked parents. The contractor seems willing to work with me on a resolution, I said. That's good. But Rosemary, I discovered something else when I researched your parents' property records. My stomach dropped. What? They took out a home equity loan 6 months ago for $45,000. The loan application lists your rental income as part of their qualifying income. The phone almost slipped from my hand. They use my rent payments to qualify for a loan. Without your knowledge or consent, yes, that's definitely financial fraud. I closed my eyes trying to process this information. Not only had my parents been misappropriating my rent money, but they'd used it as collateral to borrow against the house. Margaret, what if I told you I might be able to resolve the contractor situation through a business arrangement? What kind of arrangement? I explained Jake's potential interest in marketing services. Margaret was quiet for a moment. That could actually work in your favor, she said finally. If you can resolve the immediate contract issue and establish a legitimate business relationship, it removes your parents' leverage over you. Plus, if you're financially independent, it strengthens your position in dealing with the money they've taken. When I returned to the bedroom, I found my parents and Jake in heated discussion. Emma had apparently arrived while I was on the phone and was sitting on the floor crying. What's going on? I asked. Your sister just told us about David's job situation, Mom said. We had no idea things were so bad for them financially. This was rich. My parents, who had been systematically draining my finances to support Emma's situation, were acting surprised to learn about the financial problems they'd been helping to cover up. Actually, I said, I think it's time for everyone to stop pretending they don't know what's been going on. I told them about the home equity loan, the fraudulent use of my rental income, and the potential legal consequences of contracting work without authorization. With each revelation, the family's expressions grew more strained. Emma looked up from the floor. You took out a loan against the house using Rosemary's rent money. We needed capital to help with your situation and some other expenses, Dad said defensively. What other expenses? I asked. Mom and Dad exchanged glances. Finally, Mom spoke up. We've been planning to sell the house and downsize to a condo. The renovation was supposed to increase the property value so we could get a better price. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. My parents hadn't just been taking my money to help Emma, they'd been using it to fund a house renovation that would benefit them financially when they sold the property. So let me get this straight, I said. You've been taking my rent money to fund Emma's wedding and living expenses while also using it as collateral for a loan to pay for house renovations that would increase the value of an asset I have no stake in. And then you expected me to pay an additional $32,000 for a luxury nursery in a house you're planning to sell. The silence in the room was deafening. Jake Morrison cleared his throat. Miss Henderson, about that business proposition you mentioned. I think we need to talk. I spent the next 2 hours with Jake at a coffee shop discussing his business goals and my marketing capabilities. It turned out that Morrison Construction had been operating primarily on referrals for the past 20 years, but Jake was ready to expand and modernize his approach. I've got the skills and the reputation, he said, but I don't understand social media, online reviews, or digital marketing. Most of my competitors have websites and online presence that make me look like I'm stuck in the past. I pulled out my laptop and showed him examples of marketing campaigns I'd developed for other small businesses. Jake was particularly interested in a case study where I'd helped a plumbing company triple their customer base in 18 months through targeted online advertising and reputation management. What would something like that cost? He asked. For a full marketing package, including website development, social media management, online advertising, and reputation management, I usually charge between $15,000 and $25,000 for the first year, depending on the scope. Jake leaned back in his chair. And you think this could help me grow the business significantly? I think it could transform your business. Construction is a competitive field, but most contractors are terrible at marketing. The ones who invest in professional marketing tend to dominate their markets. Here's what I'm thinking, Jake said. Your parents' contract is for $32,000. If you provide me with a comprehensive marketing package valued at that amount, I'll consider the contract fulfilled and your family off the hook for payment. It was an elegant solution. I'd be providing services worth the contract amount my parents would be released from their financial obligation, and I'd gain a potentially lucrative long-term client. There's one condition, I added. I want a separate contract with you for ongoing marketing services after the initial package is complete. I think we could build something really successful together. Jake extended his hand. Deal, but I'll need to see a formal proposal with deliverables and timelines. I can have that to you by tomorrow morning. When I returned to my parents' house, I found a very different scene than I'd left. Emma was gone and my parents were sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by financial documents and looking defeated. Where's Emma? I asked. She went home, Mom said quietly. She and David are going to figure out their own living situation without involving us. Good for them. Dad looked up from a stack of bills. Rosemary, we need to talk about the money situation. Yes, we do. I sat down across from them and explained the arrangement I'd worked out with Jake. Their relief was visible, but I wasn't finished. Now we need to talk about the $38,000 in rent you've misappropriated over the past 2 years. It wasn't misappropriated, Dad protested weakly. You were living here contributing to the household. Contributing to the household would be paying for utilities, groceries, and maintenance. Paying for Emma's wedding, subsidizing her living expenses, and funding your house improvements while being expected to live in the basement is not contributing to the household. It's being financially exploited. I pulled out the documentation Margaret had prepared. According to my attorney, using my rental income as collateral for your home equity loan without my knowledge constitutes fraud. Contracting renovation work and expecting me to pay for it without authorization is also fraud. Mom started crying. We never meant for it to go this far. We were just trying to help Emma through a difficult time. With my money, without my knowledge or consent. What do you want from us? Dad asked. I want full repayment of the money that was used for purposes other than legitimate household expenses. According to my calculations, that's approximately $26,000. Dad's face went red. We don't have that kind of money. Then you'll need to figure out how to get it, just like you expected me to figure out how to pay for the nursery renovation. I stood up to leave. I'll give you 30 days to come up with a repayment plan. If we can't reach an agreement, my attorney will file a civil lawsuit for recovery of funds plus damages. Rosemary, please, Mom pleaded. We're family. Can't we work this out without threats of lawsuits? We're family when you need my money, I said. But when I need a place to live or input on major financial decisions that affect me suddenly, I'm just a tenant who should figure it out on my own. I left them at the kitchen table and went to collect the rest of my belongings from the garage. As I packed the last box into my car, Emma pulled into the driveway. Rosemary, wait, she called, getting out of her car. I need to tell you something. What now? David and I talked, and we want to pay you back for the money Mom and Dad used to help us. It might take a while, but we'll figure out a way. This was unexpected. Emma, you don't have to. Yes, I do. David was furious when I told him the whole story. He had no idea that your rent money was being used to subsidize our life. He said it was basically theft, and he's right. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope that my family relationships might be salvageable. I appreciate that, I said. But first, you two need to focus on getting back on your feet. We're going to, Emma said. David has some interviews lined up and I'm going to increase my freelance work. We're moving to a cheaper apartment and we're going to stop taking money from Mom and Dad. Good for you. Emma looked down at her feet. I'm also sorry about the room situation. It was wrong to just assume you'd give up your space without being consulted. Thank you for saying that. Where are you going to live? I'm working on it, I said. But for the first time in 2 years, I'll be making that decision based on what I want and can afford, not what's convenient for everyone else. As I drove away from the house, I felt lighter than I had in months. The business arrangement with Jake would not only resolve the immediate crisis, but potentially launch my career as an independent marketing consultant. The legal pressure on my parents would either result in repayment or at least acknowledgement of the financial harm they'd caused. And Emma's apology, while not fixing everything, suggested that at least one family member was capable of recognizing when they'd done wrong. For the first time since Emma had appeared in my doorway with paint samples, I felt like I was in control of my own situation. The proposal I prepared for Jake Morrison was the most comprehensive marketing package I'd ever developed. I included website design and development, search engine optimization, social media strategy, and management online advertising campaigns, reputation management, branded materials, and a year of ongoing consultation and support. When I presented it to him the next morning, he whistled appreciatively. "This is impressive work," he said, flipping through the detailed timeline and deliverables. I had no idea marketing could be this strategic. Most small business owners don't, I said. They think marketing is just putting an ad in the phone book or having a Facebook page. But comprehensive marketing is about building a brand, establishing trust, and creating systems that generate consistent leads and referrals. Jake signed the contract immediately. When can we start? Right now if you want. I'll need access to your existing business information logo files if you have them, and a list of your current and past clients for testimonials. Over the next 2 weeks, I threw myself into the Morrison construction marketing project with more enthusiasm than I'd felt about work in years. Working from Ashley's living room, I built Jake's website, created his social media presence, and developed advertising campaigns that started generating leads within days. The transformation was remarkable. Jake went from getting 1 or 2 inquiry calls per week to fielding dozens. His phone started ringing so frequently that he had to hire an answering service. Rosemary. He said during one of our weekly check-ins, "This is incredible. I've booked more work in the past 2 weeks than I normally get in 2 months. And this is just the beginning. Wait until we get the reputation management and referral systems fully operational." Jake leaned forward. "I want to talk to you about that ongoing contract you mentioned. We negotiated a monthly retainer agreement that would provide me with steady income while allowing me to take on other clients. For the first time since college, I could see a clear path to financial independence. The success with Jake's business gave me leverage in other areas of my life as well. When Margaret Walsh called to discuss the situation with my parents, I was in a much stronger position. How's the family responding to the 30-day deadline?" she asked. "They're scrambling," I said. "Dad's been calling potential investors for his consulting business, and Mom's been researching part-time jobs. I think the reality of having to repay the money is finally hitting them. And your sister?" "Emma and David are actually doing better. He got a job offer from a small accounting firm, and she's picked up several new freelance clients. They've moved to a smaller apartment and seem committed to handling their own finances." "That's good. It sounds like setting boundaries forced everyone to take responsibility for their own situations." Margaret was right. By refusing to continue being the family's financial safety net, I'd forced everyone to confront the unsustainability of their arrangements. A week before the 30-day deadline, my parents asked to meet with me. We sat in the same coffee shop where I'd met with Emma, but this time the dynamic was completely different. "We've been looking at our options," Dad began, "and we think we can repay you, but it will take time." Mom pulled out a handwritten budget. "We can pay you $500 per month until the debt is settled." I looked at their calculation. $500 per month for $26,000 would take over 4 years. "That's not acceptable," I said. "You took the money over 2 years. You can repay it in 2 years." "We can't afford more than $500 per month," Dad protested. "Then you'll need to make some changes. Sell assets, downsize, get additional income. Figure it out." The phrase hung in the air between us. Dad's face flushed as he recognized his own words being thrown back at him. "We're trying to be reasonable here," Mom said. "Reasonable would be repaying money you took without permission as quickly as possible, with interest for the inconvenience and opportunity cost." We eventually agreed on a compromise $750 per month for 36 months with a lump sum payment if they sold the house during that period. Margaret reviewed the agreement and had it legally documented to ensure enforceability. 6 months after the paint sample incident, my life had completely transformed. I was living in my own one-bedroom apartment running a successful marketing consultancy with Jake as my anchor client and maintaining cordial but boundaried relationships with my family. Emma had her baby in October, a healthy girl they named Charlotte. When she invited me to visit, I was surprised to find myself genuinely happy to meet my niece. Emma and David had created a modest but comfortable home in their new apartment, decorated with furniture from thrift stores and Emma's own artwork. "We're doing it on our own," Emma said proudly as she showed me around. "It's tight financially, but everything we have, we earned ourselves." "How does it feel?" I asked. "Scary sometimes, but also amazing. I didn't realize how much stress I was carrying from always owing money to someone or depending on someone else to solve our problems." The monthly payments from my parents had been arriving on schedule, and while our relationship was still strained, there was a new respect in our interactions. They had learned that I was capable of protecting myself legally and financially, and I had learned that I didn't need their approval or support to build a successful life. But the most unexpected development came from my business relationship with Jake. The marketing campaigns had been so successful that he was considering franchising his construction model to other markets. "I want you to be my partner in this expansion," he said during a meeting in December. "Not just the marketing consultant, but an actual business partner." The opportunity would require me to invest some capital and take on more responsibility, but the potential returns were substantial. After years of having my money taken by others, I was being offered the chance to truly invest in my own future. As I sat in my apartment that evening reviewing the partnership proposal, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed. The sister who had stood in my doorway with paint samples casually displacing me from my home had inadvertently triggered the transformation that led to my independence and success. Sometimes the worst betrayals become the best opportunities, but only if you're willing to fight for yourself. 2 years later, I stood in the kitchen of my own house, a modest 3-bedroom colonial that I'd purchased with the proceeds from my expanded marketing business. Jake and I had successfully launched Morrison construction franchises in 3 neighboring states, and my consulting firm now employed 2 additional marketers. The monthly payments from my parents had continued steadily, and they'd recently made their final payment after selling the family home and downsizing to a condo. Our relationship had evolved into something more honest and respectful, built on clear boundaries and mutual accountability. Emma knocked on my front door on a Saturday morning carrying Charlotte, who was now a chatty toddler with Emma's curly hair and David's mischievous smile. "Aunt Rosemary," Charlotte squealed, reaching for me. "How's my favorite niece?" I asked, taking her into my arms. "She's your only niece," Emma laughed, "but thank you for making her feel special." We settled in my living room with coffee while Charlotte played with the wooden blocks I kept for her visits. Emma looked around the house, taking in the hardwood floors, the updated kitchen visible through the doorway, and the large windows that filled the space with natural light. "I love what you've done with this place," she said. "Thank you. It's taken a while to get it exactly how I want it, but it's finally starting to feel like home." Emma was quiet for a moment, watching Charlotte stack blocks into increasingly precarious towers. "Rosemary, I need to tell you something," she said finally. "David and I have been talking about what happened 3 years ago, and we want you to know how much we appreciate what you did." "What do you mean?" by standing up to mom and dad, by refusing to let them continue using you financially. It forced all of us to grow up and take responsibility for our own lives. Emma picked up one of Charlotte's blocks, turning it over in her hands. David's been promoted twice at the accounting firm, and my freelance business has grown to the point where I'm considering hiring an assistant. We bought a house last month, and we did it entirely on our own income and savings. That's wonderful, Emma. I'm proud of you both. The thing is, if you hadn't forced the issue, we might still be dependent on mom and dad's financial help. We might never have learned that we were capable of building our own life. Charlotte brought me one of her block towers, looking proud of her architectural achievement. Very impressive, I told her. You're quite the builder. Like Uncle Jake? She asked. Charlotte had met Jake several times and was fascinated by his stories about construction projects. Maybe even better than Uncle Jake, I said, making her giggle. Emma smiled. She loves coming here. You've created something really special, Rosemary. It wasn't easy, I said. There were times when I wondered if fighting back was worth damaging family relationships. But you didn't damage them, Emma said. You made them honest. Mom and Dad had to face the consequences of their actions, and David and I had to learn to solve our own problems. Everyone's stronger now. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. Partnership meeting moved to Monday. Celebration dinner tonight for landing the Pennsylvania contract. I showed Emma the message. Jake's business has grown so much that we're expanding into Pennsylvania. It's been an incredible journey. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd just agreed to pay for the nursery renovation? Emma asked. Sometimes, I probably would have stayed trapped in that cycle of financial dependency, watching my savings disappear while everyone else benefited from my work. Charlotte had moved on to arranging her blocks in precise rows, creating what appeared to be a miniature city. Look, Mama, she said to Emma, I made houses for everyone. Everyone gets their own house, Emma agreed. That's perfect, sweetie. After Emma and Charlotte left, I walked through my house, appreciating the quiet satisfaction of owning something that was entirely mine. The mortgage payments, the maintenance decisions, the decoration choices were all mine to make. No one could stand in my doorway and casually announce that my space was being repurposed for someone else's needs. That evening, Jake and I celebrated the Pennsylvania expansion at a restaurant downtown. Over dinner, he told me about his plans for the next phase of business growth. I've been thinking about your suggestion for a comprehensive home services model, he said. Construction, renovation, maintenance, landscaping, all under one brand. It would be a significant expansion, I said, but the market research supports it. Homeowners want one trusted company they can call for any property need. Would you be interested in leading the marketing and operations for something that ambitious? The opportunity would mean leaving consulting work behind and focusing entirely on building this business with Jake. It was a big decision, but the potential for creating something substantial was exciting. Let me think about it, I said, but I'm definitely interested. As I drove home that night, I thought about the journey from that moment in my childhood bedroom to this evening's discussion about business expansion. The sister who had displaced me with paint samples had unknowingly set in motion a series of events that led to opportunities I never would have discovered otherwise. But the real transformation hadn't been external. The house, the business, the financial independence were all symptoms of a deeper change, learning to value myself enough to demand fair treatment from others. For years, I had prioritized family harmony over personal well-being, assuming that keeping everyone else happy was my responsibility. The paint sample confrontation forced me to recognize that people who truly care about you don't ask you to sacrifice your security for their convenience. Setting boundaries had been uncomfortable at first. There were family dinners where conversations felt strained, holidays where the old dynamics were disrupted, and moments when I wondered if standing up for myself was worth the temporary conflict. But the results spoke for themselves. Emma and David had built a stable, independent life. My parents had learned to live within their means and treat me as an equal rather than a financial resource. And I had discovered capabilities and opportunities that years of people-pleasing had kept hidden. The most important lesson had been recognizing the difference between supporting family and enabling dysfunction. True support helps people develop their own strength and independence. Enabling dysfunction means absorbing the consequences of other people's poor decisions while preventing them from learning and growing. Sometimes the people who should protect us are the ones we need protection from, but setting boundaries and standing up for yourself can transform manipulation into opportunity and create the independence you never knew you needed. 3 weeks later, I signed the partnership agreement with Jake to launch our comprehensive home services company. It felt like the perfect next step in a journey that had begun with paint samples and a casual announcement that my space was being taken away. But this time, I was the one making the decisions about my future, and no one could stand in my doorway and tell me to figure it out on my own. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where family members expected you to sacrifice your own security for their convenience? How did you handle it? And what would you do differently if it happened again? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and share it with anyone who might need to hear about the power of setting boundaries. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about turning life's challenges into opportunities for growth and independence. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it encourages you to stand up for yourself when the people closest to you forget to value your well-being. Remember, sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is to stop enabling their dysfunction and start modeling healthy boundaries. Until next time, keep fighting for the life you deserve.